done the application. What does it want me to put through the application?
To the application's folder on the back.
All right, we're live. All right, I'll cue you in. Your mic is going hot, but hang on. All right, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to YouTube Model Builders Fine Scale Live Show for Tuesday, September 11th, 2018. This is a special day for most of us Americans. Day to live in infamy. It's our modern day of that. A little bit of reverence. And there's been a lot of posts on Facebook about that. A lot of us in our community commenting on Ron Marsh's post about that. Our day to remember the awful things that have happened to our country. But this evening, we can have a bit of a positive moment talking about model trains, where we can get away from the real world and lose that for a moment. Tonight, I hope to catch up with our guys, since this is our first regularly scheduled show back after the brief summer break that we took. And this month, we're going to do a little bit of chemistry. We won't get too geeky. There won't be a lot of beakers, and we won't have a test afterwards, so you should be okay. Just a moment, we'll get started on talking about that. Get caught up with what everybody done through the summer as we get ready for the winter modeling season, as we get excited about that. Just a moment, we'll come back with that after a brief moment for station identification from Johnny, if you please.
All right, just want to let everybody know, yeah, we got some of our shows coming back this month, so tonight's the Fine Scale show. Also, next week, that'll be September the 19th, we'll have Joe's show. Kind of changing the format around, and we'll be changing the name too, so I haven't got a finalization on the name yet, but I'll get that by the end of this week. But his show will be on September the 19th, which is a Wednesday night. That's 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern time. And also Thursday night, we always have the Johnny Mall Train Talk show, which is 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. So I think I've done table dance long enough. Catch Andy a little off guard there, but all right, Andy, it's back to you again.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you guys doing?
Great.
So we're going to get, yeah, glad to have you, Lionel, especially. I know I've got a chance to talk to you a bit here recently. I'm sure glad to have you on board talking with us, hanging out with us tonight. This might get we might get a little bit geeky this show. The last show that we had was with Jerry from Mount Albert's fame and now with Fast Tracks, and he did some physics basically to explain light and some of the dynamics about layout lighting and how much information you need to do that correctly. You don't need to know all these things. It's one of those you kind of get to know these things, and they can help you a whole lot. And having some basic knowledge of chemistry will help you in basically every asset in the hobby. You know, especially dealing with modern paints. You know, we were spoiled for a lot of years with the polyscale and scale coat paints. They were really cut and dry as to what to work with. It was really well known in the hobby for a long time. This day and age, there's much conversation in our community here about the proper way to thin, dilute, or spray some of the particular paints that we deal with. Vallejo has given me some difficulty, but I've settled on using their thinner. But having some knowledge of chemistry and how to do that safely is a valuable asset, and the safety part is absolutely essential in the hobby. I was talking to the guys a few minutes ago and talking of all the things I've done in life, of all the hobbies, from etching electrical boards, which is not dissimilar to what I'm going to mess with tonight as a technique, to cleaning Harley Davidsons, to working at IT or as a carpenter. The only job I've had or only experience I've had in life that has exposed me to the degree of toxic chemicals, caustic and acids and just dangerous chemicals you need to be safety with in my life was working in a laboratory briefly some years ago, working with hydrochloric acids and nitrics and pyritic, and there's a lot to know about those safely. And it taught me a bit that I didn't have experience with. Tonight I want to talk a bit about how to do that safely. For like a lot of us that use that are doing styrene kits, there's plenty of chemicals or glues. They're not actually a glue. They melt the plastic, and you're welding effectively with plastics welding. And a lot of those, whether it's the testers or the 10X7 that most of us loved, the various chemicals that we use to break plastic down so that it can be welded, they're mostly based on a ketone of some kind. Methyl ethyl ketone being the most prevalent in my personal preference. And I've went to using methyl ethyl ketone, or MEK, entirely these days. It's super fast, but it's extremely caustic. And it has to be treated with a degree of reverence and respect because of how dangerous it can potentially be. And you need to use gloves when you're decanting it. So I buy methyl ethyl ketone.
Those are not TSA gloves. I'm getting
They're what?
Feedback. They're not TSA gloves.
No, they're not TSA gloves. There's none of this stuff that see. They won't even do that. They don't even do that kind of exciting noise that scares everybody to death. So these are nitrile. You can get latex or whatever. You just want unpowdered gloves if you're messing with models because they make a mess. Messing with MEK, this old 10X7 model, which I loved 10X7. I thought that was the greatest glue coming and going for years. But a bottle of this stuff was $7 or $8, $9, and I bought a gallon of MEK for $25-ish, and I decant it. When I use it itself, I'll use a micro brush to work with it, and I won't use gloves. I'm not getting it on my skin. I'm a little bit cautious and careful to make sure I don't get at least very much on my skin. But when I decant it into this, I do use nitrite gloves to do that. The risk of getting it on your skin. Miles had a bit of a scary story he was telling me about the chemistry of that, of what it does to you. Will you remind us or tell the viewers what the chemistry professor had told you about that? Because that was pretty intense.
Yeah, Wayne was I was talking to him about doing the show on Trainmasters. He was saying that acetone, which is recommended on a lot of the websites for melting plastic or fusing it together, acetone actually, if it gets on your skin, it sucks the fatty tissue out of your skin. That's why your skin goes white wherever that acetone touches it. And it is extremely dangerous to get it in your eyes, splash it in or whatever, because the damage is pretty much not reversible. So you don't want to splash that stuff in. I want to say something too about what you just said. MEK is good. I too think that the 10X7R was absolutely fantastic. The 10X7R was about as pure. And again, I went back to Wayne. Wayne was the dean of chemistry at Benedictine University and later on at Arizona University. And he had one of his students test a couple of the things for me. And the 10X7R is about the purest form of methylene chloride that was out on the market. So what you were getting was a very pure version of methylene chloride, as opposed to some of the other brands that I won't go naming off, but some of them have plastic parts that they sell along with their glues. They have other things in there. Some of the paint companies made glues, but the 10X7R was actually a pure form of that methylene chloride. So when I started to do the classes for Amherst, where we had to do 50 students at a time with the same stuff, obviously we ran out of our stock of 10X7R. And I went to the plastic supply house, and what they sell is some stuff called Weldon, WELD-ON, and it comes in various degrees of speed of attack on the plastic. That's the best way I can describe it. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the fastest. 3 is a little slower. 2 is a little slower than that. 1 is a little slower than that. They don't normally carry the 2 and the 1 even. They'll carry 3 or 4. But now what the students get is a 10X7R bottle that I refill with Weldon 4. So they're actually using Weldon 4, but it's just as pure a methylene chloride. And in a minute I'll go get another one that I use. I don't know, do you use the Fowler Expert at all?
Yeah. Well, I do, but nobody hears me.
Okay. All right. Johnny uses it. The Fuller Expert, and I'll get a jar of it here in a minute and show you. I don't think I've got it in here. I had, again, Wayne do an analysis on it. It is methylene chloride, very pure, but it has styrene dissolved in it. You got one there, Andy? Yeah, that's it. Little blue bottle. Comes from Germany. It's absolutely fantastic for using when you need time to move the parts around. It's also great because it has styrene dissolved in it. It will actually create a fillet if you're doing like on a roof, putting a roof in, and you've got a parapet wall on the roof, it puts them in here. It will actually do the fillet just like my thumb little wedgie there does. And then when you go to paint the black tar on top of the roof, it looks like the roofers really have slopped tar onto the roof. So it really has a lot of advantages, and those are the two main glues that I use, the Weld-On 4 and the Fuller Expert. But anyway, to each his own, but that's a couple of things that I use anyway.
I do like the Fuller Expert quite well. Like you said, when you need time to work with it. And the bottle, the dispenser, is spectacular. It doesn't attack the plastic. I would like I use wood glue out of this little thing with a needle on it. That's just stellar for working with wood kits. If you can't put a straight methyl ketone in it, it will attack the plastic, obviously. I want to buy the glass one of these, and I have got one of these touch and flow applicators. I've only used it a couple times so far. I just bought it at the NMRA show recently to experiment with, and I'm quite pleased with working with it. It's a fairly interesting applicator. I normally use just a needle, and mostly for super glues, a needle with the eye cut off from it stuck in the end of the stick, basically.
Do you have an extra bottle of the Fuller Expert?
I've got a couple bottles of it, but I think I've got one expert, one super expert or something. It's got an orange label on it.
When one of them empties, that plastic that's made out of does not, it will not be attacked by the methylene chloride. So
Yep.
just simply put your methylene chloride in there. But be sure, I keep about a 5/1000th wire that I put down that needle to keep it from clogging. You want to put that needle in also to keep it from evaporating.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea, because the cap that goes with it's a fairly loose connection. So
yeah, right. No, you want to put that wire in. That's much better.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm really happy with that. What there was a glue that you talked about that has a bit of plastic in it. Is that the Fuller that has the plastic already?
Fuller, yes.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with how well that material works as a glue.
It's really nice because it also, we would never make mistakes that have, gaps in our joints, but the nice thing about that glue is that it will fill any of those gaps. And lots of times once you come back there and paint over it, you can't tell that there was a little bit of imperfection in the joint.
Well, that's the best filler coming and going. I've got Squadron and maybe some testers and some other kind of a putty, bottler's putty that I like quite well. They're fine for certain applications. My favorite filler period is I've got a little small paint bottle that I just throw bits of plastic in off of kits and keep some MEK in there with it. It makes a paste. It's not easy to clean up because it's going to harden as a pure plastic. You've got to cut or sand or break it away from the model to get a good surface. So if I'm working with brick or something, I'll use a putty. If I had a pretty good sized cap, I'll use the plastic.
I used to use the Tester's liquid glue, and what I did with that was I used to take the sprue that parts came on,
Yep.
throw it in the bottle when it was down about half, and just let it sit there and melt. And like you said, for filling, new cracks and so on. But I've gotten away from it. I'm using the thin Tamiya stuff now. It's like water.
I want to try some of that. I do like the MEK, but the MEK is super fast, and I've been meaning to experiment with it. Like I was talking about the safety of this, just going and willy-nilly mixing chemicals together is not for the faint of heart. Definitely not recommended. But I know acetone and MEK are compatible with each other, so you can use acetone to dilute MEK. And I've used acetone as a replacement for MEK in certain applications. So I use contact cement to lay ground, to hand lay track with. and you don't want to use a contact cement pure. It's just hard to work with. So I dilute it. I keep it in the bottle, but you know, contact cement's quite thick, and I've got that as a fairly thin solution. And I've started with acetone, but it doesn't break the contact cement down smoothly. MEK, just a little bit of MEK in the contact cement makes all the difference in the world. But there's a lot of these chemicals we work with that are dangerous. The ones that I want to talk about tonight, the reason I've got gloves on, is to talk about ferric chloride or iron chloride. That's been around forever. I mean, I remember reading about people using that when I was quite young, getting in the hobby and hadn't messed with it until I got into electronics got my degree in electrical engineering and have built quite a few circuits as a hobbyist studying electronics and using ferric chloride. And I've got some that I've had for a long time that's in a dry mix in a glass bottle. You throw a little water in it, and it produces a bit of hydrochloric acid as a byproduct of the production process, as will this as moisture reaches it. But this you can buy pre-mixed already in a black solution that looks like this, and we'll change the other camera in a minute as I work with it. You need to be careful working with it. The fumes are not great. You should work outside or a spray booth, an airbrush spray booth is your friend with this. With what little I'm going to do tonight, I think the chemicals have got to you, Miles, over time.
Yeah, I don't know what your problem is. I haven't had any problem with them at all.
Not obviously not. Some of this stuff, I mean, it's spectacular. The results that you can get, I've used a few techniques to do it. I did this roof with ferric chloride, cutting the individual material or the individual pieces of metal roofing into small scale size or slightly over scale size pieces and overlapping them, and then doing them at different dimensions. This one's just weathered quite heavily, but you can also it will straight eat the material. So if you put a piece of this and just leave it in the material, it will completely disappear in a few minutes, and you'll think somebody stole it from you. But it will eat the end off from them the way that corrugated metal or corrugated iron siding does in the real world. In my case, where I model the coal industry of Appalachia, the buildings have been built out of this since they went from wood to this, and they're still building them out of this today. And they went to this in the 30s and 40s. And the bottoms of those structures are all eaten up with this stuff because of the process of washing, or what they call washing out of washer plant, is actually floating the coal out of the dirt. And to do that, use diesel fuel and some other chemicals to get a certain gravity of the chemical, of the water, to float the coal away. That stuff produces pyritic acids. So does, in reaction with the coal, of the iron that is in the coal, the carbon that is in the coal. And it eats that material fiercely. So if you want to model industrial buildings, especially around chemicals, and in the coal industry especially, there's nothing produces this effect quite as well as using ferric chloride, and you can't get the result any other way other than tearing it up with an X-Acto knife, which does work pretty well with the cardboard or the paper, corrugated paper products that like Bar Mill sells. That's a nice product, but getting the full results, the ferric chloride will both weather and damage or deteriorate it or tear holes in it. It's a really interesting process. And while we talk, we'll point the camera down and we'll throw a few pieces in and see what the results are. You also need to keep some clean water around. It can be tap water if you have decent tap water. You wouldn't want a high sulfur content in the tap water, but as long as it's regular chlorinated water, you're fine, so that you can stop the reaction. You want to watch it act right up until the point that it starts being active, and then put it into water to stop that reaction fairly quickly, so you control at what point the deterioration of the metal happens. I went ahead and pre-cut some of the materials so that we can work with a couple different materials. I've used this corrugated metal from Campbell's for, gosh, I don't know, my entire life. Those have been around forever. And I've got some of the raised, this is B-seam tin roofing or metal roofing, and I've got some that's raised seam or T-seam roofing. Both of these others are for builders at scale. They're obviously a quite good alloy or material because the amount of time they take in the ferric chloride to begin the reaction process is a bit long. So I may throw a piece in and we'll try that, but I've cut some pieces to scale. In this case, they're 8 foot by 4 foot. On the prototype, at least in my industry, what I'm used to is seeing a 3 foot exposure or about a foot lap in them. So So I cut them to the 4 foot and lap them about a foot. So we'll put the camera down and there we go. Okay. So I've got some material, some paper towels or what have you to dry the water process off from it. A little bit of clean water. Even with vitrite gloves, it doesn't really attack the glove, but there could be some condensation because the way chlorine works, or the chloride in it, which becomes a chlorine. Again, even if you're working in small batches and not working in a spray booth or outside, you want to keep away from this stuff and not inhale it. It's rough to the skin, it's caustic, but most critically, you don't want to ingest this in any way. And it'll take a few minutes to begin the reaction process, but once it does, it will go off or react fairly quickly. And it'll do something pretty exciting here in a minute and start the bubbling process. While that starts to work and while we can take a look at it, I've made a few others, but then I want to talk about another chemical that does a pretty similar thing. It's pretty handy. This is a piece I had left over that I've already done that I didn't deteriorate, but that's just the coloration that you can get with it. While it looks quite black, that's the tea seed. And it will produce a texture on it. And nothing else quite does that as well. Another chemical that's worth looking at is and I use microengineering. There's a bunch of companies. Micromark makes a blackening agent. There's a bunch of those that do. I use microengineering's blackening agent for blackening rail and such. Again, another chemical that you want to be quite safe working with. This is not one of the cases where you can borrow the wife's utensils and when she won't catch you. This is not one of those rare cases. Otherwise, I'd say that's a great idea. I threw that in a couple minutes ago. You don't want to rub it for a while either. The blackening that's on there is pretty easy to take off. One of the great things about this as a weathering solution versus just paint, and I do paint. You know, painting rails, especially with something we all use, that camo spray paint. That stuff's spectacular. The blackening agent is somewhat electrically conductive. Actually, quite electrically conductive. Now, you can see that go off and start to smoke, and it'll fizz. It's a quite active reaction, or exothermic. Give that a minute to calm down, and I'll show you what the results were for that. But once it starts to go, and you've got to watch it. You can't step away from this while it happens. It'll go off quite quickly once it does. So here you get a black. It blackens it. It will curl and turn it, which you can straighten up. It'll eat the end off from it and produce that natural deterioration that happens. Natural deterioration that happens on our balls. I'll show you this a little better when I change back to the other camera so you can see the details. Pull another piece in. I've used a bunch of different techniques for weathering this material. I've used George Celios has a great technique for weathering metal roofing, just using weathering powders with a dilute mixture of white glue or Mod Podge, which I'm a super fan of, or a matte medium, and putting some of that material on and brushing weathering powders through it. I have used some of that on this structure in addition to the to get some of the different color and variation that I wanted. There is some AIM or Bragg weathering powders used with Mod Podge or an artist's medium, a matte medium. And you can get some various colors. You can get some nice rusting effects. But the deterioration that you get with these is quite interesting. It also depends on oxygen. Like I said, it's an exothermic reaction. Actually, I'm going to try to show you this. It smokes, it fizzes, it buzzes, it bubbles around. It's really quite exciting what's going on there. It's kind of a fun process to deal with. This needs to be treated with a degree of respect working with it. And I can never work with more than a couple at a time. In this case, since I'm not at my spray booth, I just want to work with one at a time because of how much. If you want to move it around and get its exothermic, you need oxygen as part of the reaction. See how much that one actually broke down. That one broke down just about completely. Yeah, so it's a real sensitive timing is real sensitive, and you will lose a few pieces. I always do. It's a kind of exciting process to work with. I was just talking about the blackening chemical. It also, to speak about how they work at being exothermic as an excited reaction, and the oxygen benefit with the microengineering blackening chemical. It just blackens. The name of the game. It's very properly titled for what it does, but it aerates the chemical, and that does not mean take a drinking straw and blow air into it. That's not very advisable. I move the products that I'm working with in and out of the chemical, and take it in and out of the chemical repeatedly. And as I take it in and out, it will get a bit of an orange color. It would get a bit of an orange color. So I do my time plates, and I aerate them into blackening solution. And it gives me a bit of a rust color. So I'm going to change cameras and let you see what this does. These things are quite interesting. But the blackening, and I'm not sure what the results are with other blackening solutions. I've always used, I used the microengineering years ago. I've always used that one. I like the microengineering blackening product. It's somewhat weak. However, I do dilute it. So I keep a little bottle separate and keep it about 50-50. But in that case, I use denatured, or not denatured, but distilled water. So I don't put the other alternatives in it. It's not a cleaning, it's an actual mixing agent. I don't use the raw, pure solution very often. There are times that I'll stick a micro brush in this. I've done some abandoned trackage, and I wanted the top of the rail to be quite black, and I used it straight. This piece is transparent. Let's see. There's holes, actually. Let's get small.
I saw one. His fingers were in the way of the other ones.
Yeah.
There
and
we go.
It gets a transparency to it. And so what you're seeing is the white. You're seeing through that material. It deteriorates much, and you can get a wide range of effects from a blackened effect to heavily deteriorated, transparent, like the one I showed you, to the end being quite deteriorated and torn and misshapen and curved. If you repeatedly oxygenate it, take it in and out, it will produce a texture on it. It will build up material on the outside of it as it foams. That especially has a nice effect on this stuff that's quite thick. This stuff for builders and scale. It has a really nice effect for roofing, but it wouldn't be as appropriate as the Campbell's material is for doing corrugated corrugated structures. And despite how much time consuming that's going to be, I've got to build a 7-story, I think it might be 4 or 5-story, a washer plant, and I'm going to build it entirely out of 4x8 panels glued to a framework, because there's just nothing's going to recreate the effect that you're going to get out of doing that process. And I can understand the fear of it. People are justly nervous about working with it.
Well, I, for one, I refuse to use that stuff.
You're not the only one. There's plenty of people who are justly afraid to use it.
Not that I'm afraid. It's just I don't need those chemicals in the house.
Yep. I can understand that completely. If you do have it, it needs to be treated with a wide degree of respect. It's got to be, if you've got kids at home, I'm not sure I'd recommend it, period. If so, it definitely needs to be well protected, locked up. It's spectacularly toxic. It's not, we use a lot of these things. What it produces with oxygen, And the actual effect we're getting, and it's not oxygen as much as it is moisture. What we're getting is the exothermic reaction's byproduct is hydrochloric acid. Now that sounds intense and scary, but if you use boritic acid to clean your driveway or to clean concrete before, boritic acid is hydrochloric acid. It's just not using the proper chemical term. It's using the original term for boritic acid, which means salt or salt derived, because the origins of hydrochloric acid was found about I read this a few days ago when I was looking this up.
Are you talking muriatic acid?
Muriatic. I'm from Kentucky, man.
Must be a southern thing, eh, Lionel?
Yeah, I'm from Kentucky. We're not going to go through the decal argument. But boritic acid, whatever, is it's the original term comes from the origins of it from about 800 AD when it was first discovered as a reaction between sulfuric acid and rock salt. So it's an acid produced from rock salt. And you use boritic acid if you're ever going to enamel concrete or clean your driveway. You'll buy boritic acid and use that. That's the exact same byproduct of the exothermic reaction of working with ferric chloride. While it's super for weathering, if you're going to get into hobby electronics very much, I mean, if you get fairly intense with it and start building some small circuit boards, buy copper boards and etch your own quite easily by just printing on a film and taking an iron and ironing it onto the copper cladding of the PC board, and then putting it into the ferric chloride. What you're ironing on, that ink that you're ironing on off the laser printer, works as a mask. It's like masking it off. You can use masking tape, just something to keep the ferric chloride from directly being able to attack or invade that copper to eat the cladding off the printed circuit board. There's a lot of things that we do that we build all these little small custom circuits for that you could easily take a permanent marker and draw some lines on a piece of copper cladding and throw it in a vat of ferric chloride and have a custom circuit board. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do it. You can figure out how to do it in evening to make your own boards. It's great for weathering. My favorite technique for weathering metal material.
Andy, I think really as a public service to our viewers, however, I should do some translation. That's muriatic acid for those of you that did not understand that. Okay.
Or hydrochloric acid. It's pretty hard for a Kentucky boy to even screw that up.
No, it's not.
All right. Also, as a point of reference, I want to bring this to everybody's attention as well. Something, if you're going to mess with these chemicals, you should be aware of and look these up. You should look these up for MEK. In our case, working with ferric chloride, you should look up the material safety data sheet. This will give you an idea of what they're used for. For example, ferric chloride, for all the risk and danger that it does inherently have, it's used in the treatment of city water as well. It's used to make solids clump together so they can take solids out of wastewater. But it's used in your water. If you're drinking tap water, ferric chloride has been used in the treatment of that. But any of these exotic chemicals that we work with, you should just Google the MSDS sheet and pull those. They're quite valuable to know what risk you should be concerned with and how to properly treat and store the chemicals. Ferric chloride's not, exotically dangerous. It just needs to be kept away from risk of ingestion. And I'd keep it away from your kid too. But the same thing's true of MEK. And I keep a gallon of MEK here as well, and acetone and mineral spirits. All of those come with some inherent risk if they need to be treated correctly. So if you're not using, what do you use? You just use weathering powders on metal roofing material, Ralph? Or do you not like working with the metal roofing material? What's your stand on that?
I use the metal roofing material. I use gouaches. Dull coat gouaches, and I apply it with a sponge. I even have my own little stencil doing, I don't know whether you can see it. So that goes on a couple of tiles at a time or a couple of sheets at a time, and then just move it over one and keep on going. And you end up with, if I can get the tape off my finger.
Well, that'd be especially useful if you were doing it on sheet, on evergreen or whatever sheet corrugated metal. You wouldn't cut it into pieces. That's a good effect. That's nice.
And that's plastic.
Absolutely. And I still think, like I said, when I done this other, when I did use a weathering powders on it, I will give the washes a try because I've kind of fell in love with them since you turned us on to those in your weathering shows. I haven't found any other. The only other way I know how to get that kind of deterioration is to use the cardboard products like Bar Mills uses, corrugated cardboard stuff. With that, you can take an X-Acto knife and scrape at the bottom of it to deteriorate it. But that's maybe, I don't know how you would get that with metal. I don't think you can take an X-Acto and get that.
I managed to get myself some heavy-duty aluminum foil that they use in the photographic industry for building shrouds over lights. It's real thick foil. It's black, and I've used it. You can buy off of Shapeways the 2 pieces of plastic that you press the aluminum with, and you put corrugation in. Works great.
It's black already? It comes black?
Yep.
Huh.
I don't have any here. I have some out in the garage.
I've done that with regular heavy-duty, Dave brand aluminum foil. The effects are quite good.
That stuff wants to tear apart, though. That's the only problem with that.
It does. And it doesn't do very good. The reason I didn't do that tonight was it doesn't do very good with the ferric chloride solution. It breaks down so fast that as soon as the reaction starts to happen, I can't get the material out of it before it disappears. It's not heavy enough to take that reaction. I have to use the material from Campbell's or Fellers and Scale to get this, to do this effect on it.
Yep.
It's just another trick that you should have in your toolbox. And part of the conversation that I wanted to have tonight, too, was largely about there's a lot of chemicals that we use. And even if you don't have this particular chemical, the thinners and solvents that we use come with some inherent risk. And looking them up on the MSDS sheet is entirely worth being aware of. And part of what brought this one up was following Dave Limke's Facebook comments of doing some metal roofing on a structure he's working on. And I figured I showed the metal roofing I'd done when we did this structure last year, but I hadn't showed the actual effect and process. So I told Dave I'd do this, I'd show this technique on camera so you can see what the effect was and see if it's worth the trouble. What's up, Miles?
I tried with my weathering. I have a couple of steam locomotives that have I guess it's stainless steel side rods.
Yeah.
They will not go black. Even with this black in it, would not go black. I couldn't do anything.
Got to paint them.
I called up this company, Electrochemical Products, Inc. And I said to the guy, can you send me a small bottle? I said, because I've tried everything so far and nothing works. I don't want to have to pay $25, $30 for a bottle and find out it doesn't work. So he sent me this. It worked spectacular. And I'll show you what it looked like.
That's awesome. That's a problem I've got. Most of the drivetrains I have on mine, I was thinking I was going to have to paint them. I tried to use black and it didn't work.
The side rods went perfectly black. As a matter of fact, to the point where they were actually starting to rust. So I had to back it off a little bit. But for what I do, for my weathering, it works perfectly.
Yeah, I think the blackening solutions are a no-brainer. That's a must-have in your arsenal. The effects you get with metal are spectacular. And while I paint rails most of the time, on like some of the sidings where I wanted the surface of the rail blackened like it hasn't been traveled on in a while, I use the blackening on the surface of the rail. It's still electrically conductive. Even though I'm probably going to do dead rail, I wanted the surface to be conductive, at least for detection. And it's absolutely adequate enough for detection, if not for running trains on. I don't think I'd do it on a main line, and it wouldn't be appropriate for a main line anyway.
So this stuff is called InstaBlack SS370 gel, and it works beautifully.
Oh, it's a gel, so it'll stick to the side of the locomotive you're working on.
You can see it's just by the way it moves. It's not really a gel. It's a little thicker than this is, but
Yeah, the Dorval blackened
it stays in place when you put it there.
Right, blackened does it very well. You need gravity to help you with it, or you have to paint it on in numerous coats and then use water to stop the reaction. The same as with the ferric chloride or iron chloride.
The problem that I found, and using Blacken-It, I was doing some weathered loads on flat cars, and I got some real fine chain that I wanted to blacken. So I put it in the Blacken-It. I had a little thimble or a beer cap full of this stuff, put the chain in it. I went and did something else. 5 minutes later, I came back, the chain was gone.
Yeah. It just like the ferric chloride, it will attack the material. That's why you've got to use water on it to stop the reaction. And
then hit it with water.
Absolutely. You've got to use water to stop the reaction and wash it real good, wipe it down. It's not as fast reacting as the ferric chloride, which is quite exciting to watch because of how. But the orangish color that you get, I get from aerating the material. So if I move it around, like I stirred this a few times when I threw it in there earlier, and like when I'm doing round, I don't think I'm going to capture this color, but I'll give it a shot. But you never get that. It has a tinge to it, a very light orangish tinge, like an early rust. So like when I do the stainless steel tie plates that I lay down, I put them in the material. I put them in the Blacken-It chemical, and I aerate it. I just move it around. I take it in and out and let oxygen get to the Blacken-It chemical, so it's not staying completely under the chemical, and it will give you the effects.
Well, you can actually paint with rust. You know that, don't you?
Absolutely.
You take a little bit of cider vinegar or white vinegar, and you put stainless steel in it. Tomorrow morning, you wake up, the stainless steel's gone, and it's all turned to a rusty color. And it will paint those ties and stuff like that, or the tie plates.
Yeah, they say that's one of the first wood stains. One of the first wood stains in the history of the world that was ever created was a vinegar and, I guess, steel, iron, or something. But maybe you can see that rust color on these a little better. If you aerate them, they get that bit of orangishness to the color. They're not strictly black. If I throw it in there and leave it alone, it'll be black. But a bit of aeration changes that effect a little bit. As good as any other technique I've seen.
Jim Wild did a clinic at the 1985 National Convention called Sweet and Sour Sauce, and he started that whole revelation of putting steel wool into acid or into vinegar.
I made it initially to experiment with as a wood stain. I've used India inks forever. Kind of fell in love with these stains that most of us are using these days.
Hunter line.
I've kind of fell in love with those here lately. So much that I'll still use India inks for some stuff, but I haven't made any steel wool stain in a couple of years since I fell in love with those. But I used it as a wood stain initially, and it does have some interesting effect. But getting the actual rust material, and Ralph, you did that rustall, right? Where you rust? Aren't you the one who did that? Used the rustall material or that chemical that actually rusts in the gondola.
Sophisticated finishes. It's actually meant for clay pots. You paint on the first layer, which has the iron filings in it, and then you come back with the acid or whatever the chemical is that's going to make it rust, and you can literally sit there and watch it turn color. Problem with that is you have to make sure that you keep an eye on it and stop it, spray it with water to slow it down after a while, because it keeps going. If there's moisture in the air, it's going to keep rusting.
Yeah, time is one of the ingredients in all of these things. And too much time, and you won't get the effects that are probably desirable. So, and people have been doing this ferric chloride for a long, long time, and for good reason. Because while you can get some really good effects without using the technique, there is a distinct effect that is hard to replicate outside of doing this. But with the right respect, it's a great technique to have in your toolbox. You ever done that, Lionel? You ever use this and eat metal up with it?
Your
mic's turned off.
No, sir, I haven't understood a word you said.
Finally, an honest man.
There you are. See, I said it was chemistry, but I've stayed clear of all the buzzwords. I haven't said anything about about working with FE3, blah blah blah. I've stayed clear of all of the sides of it. Just to write a respect, and it's.
The PE teachers aren't the only ones that don't pay attention to. I mean, that don't really understand what you're saying.
I've tried to keep it as down to earth as possible. Chemistry's not my forte either. It's not my thing. Not my thing either. It's been a long, long, long time since I had a chemistry class, and I didn't go that far in chemistry anyway. So I find it more interesting these days than I did years ago because it's useful.
I understand chemistry. If you spray some stickum on your hand, you can pick up that locomotive back in the back of the tunnel a whole lot better than without it.
There you are. That's chemistry and physics both.
Right.
Spectacular to know. But just like the show we did with Jerry, if you've got one of a couple ways in model railroading, this is always the case. You can buy your railroad effectively. You can pay people to build railroads for you, and they do spectacular work. If you are willing to trade money for what you want. In my case, I want to trade time for it, and or I want the satisfaction of actually having done a lot of this. So understanding a bit of physics in the case of properly lighting my layout, or a bit of chemistry in the name of properly diluting paints or spraying paints or etching circuit boards, there's a value in having at least some basic understanding of that. And if nothing else, you're going to work with some things that is worth being concerned about the safety of and looking at the MSDS sheets on. If you're going to work with styrene, you're going to work with some chemicals that need to be treated with respect.
Yeah. Chris Rude's in the chat, and he's talking about Hunterline. And he's saying that Rick and Maureen, or the owners of Hunterline, they use their different products to paint and color blacken rods and so on. The problem with the Hunterline paints, they're not truly paints, they're shoe dye in 70% alcohol. So if you can get it to stay on, perfect.
Yeah, that would be a little touchy. They're great if they could absorb into wood. By experience, they're great for wood. Now, I have seen people use those stains on plastic car kits to get a basic weathering of them, but that's not the way I would go about doing it. I've even done it. I've used Indian ink washes on freight cars to just get a basic blacken of it. But at this point, I would airbrush it. I'd do a basic airbrushing, and then I'd go to town on it with oils or whatever else I was going to weather it with. Now, Hunterline does have some pigments as well. I've got the white and something else in a pigment, and it's not a shoe dye mixture. It's something else, probably just water.
It's shoe dye for white shoes.
It responds quite. It's a great material, and it gives a really nice. It's not exactly dry brushing it on there, but with a real dilute mixture put on gently, it does a really nice driftwooding effect that happens on significantly aged ties. It gets that effect as good as anything. And I've used chalk to get that effect before. It's not bad. It's not a bad effect that way, but the Hunterline white stain is a better effect for that driftwood color. So next month, guys, we're going to start on some alternative structures, materials that we haven't worked with previously. We've worked largely with wood structures. We've had some discussion about some styrene, double styrene stuff. But over the next couple months, we'll talk about a few different materials, probably the adhesives and the processes to work with those. But I'll be working on it. I have been working on a hydrocal kit. May work on a few of those kits, assembly and color and stain and weathering, plus bringing that kit all the way up to completion with some exterior details and some stainless, some etched metal fire escapes, some material for those using the real glass windows in it. We'll start on hydrocal next month. something that Ralph had drew my attention to earlier today, and I'm going to share with you guys as well and pass on. The end of summer, I think they're calling it, but it's worth being aware of if you're interested in working with hydrocal. And hydrocal structures, absolutely. That's how they go. There's a bunch of people that have made hydrocal kits through the years, and quite a few that are still making them today. Hydrocal is not an unpopular or rare material for working with, but it needs to be treated in different ways. You know, you're not going to use any of the traditional adhesives per se that we've already talked about. I'm just going to use epoxy, as that's what they recommend as well, using a 5-minute epoxy on it. But they've got a sale going where you can buy a few kits that come with some extra details and such. It's a pretty good deal. I'm going to order one of these myself. And they've got it on their Facebook page.
End of summer sale.
And that's a really nice kit. The Overlook Hotel, I already wanted to get that kit anyway, so.
What is it? 3 kits for $90?
It's 3 kits plus their details and a bit of sidewall. So it's kind of 5 pieces together. The Downtown Overlook Hotel is, I think, $90 by itself. So in fact, you get all those 3 structure kits, the details kit, and a bit of sidewalk for $150. That's a walk away steal as far as I can see. And they're spectacular. The results that you get, especially if you're going, especially for a lot of the guys around in our group that are modeling 70s to current, the degree of deterioration that you get in the brickwork on their structures is pretty unparalleled. So, just like I would argue in favor of the etched metal material for what we're doing here, hydrocal is great for getting that very deteriorated look of brick structures that have seen their better years behind them probably. In that we may, we'll probably touch on some of the other materials that are worth considering. There's a lot of resin kits still available on the market, and a whole lot of kits that used to be around that are still available on eBay, but resin has to be treated with a different degree of respect. I used to build Magnuson models years ago when I first got in the hobby. They weren't DPM or Cornerstone kits back then. Magnuson was kind of all the rage. And the resin kits tended to warp in the box or have some, you had to work with them to get them properly shaped and get them square. And we used 5-minute epoxy with them as well. So, but we'll get into that next month. Any of you guys that want to be along with us, share what you're working. Downtown Deco is one of the hydrocal kit manufacturers out there. I've looked at a bunch of the other ones. There's some really good stuff out there in hydrocal. And the quality is quite good. So, well, we'll look to see you guys next month.
Fire escape you're talking about?
Yeah, that's is that the teaching one?
That's the teaching one.
Yeah, teaching makes a good one. Imagine that laser art, Nick Masney's company. We interviewed Nick last year sometime. He's got one in laser cut pasteboard, I think it is. That's really quite good. It's a good looking kit as well. I've got one in it's not stainless steel. I think it's etched brass. And I'm pretty sure I'll solder it. I may see that yet, but I'll probably.
There's that metal technique on the roof. Here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, and working. I mean, you got to have a lot of techniques in your, in your wheelhouse, in your toolbox. It depends on what you're working with. If you're working with styrene, there's a lot of ways to weather and get that effect. I like the natural metal material stuff anyway. And if I'm looking for a significantly deteriorated structures, the way I've tried to do, I haven't found anything that gets me away from working with ferric chloride. For all the negatives and all the risk, it's still a spectacular result. Nothing gets it. So I as far as I can see, I'll be performing that technique probably as long as I'm off.
You said decals, and Marty said water slide transfers.
I thought we'd figured the decal decal thing out, but leave it to Marty. All right, if nobody else has any other questions about that, don't be afraid of it. Give it a shot. Just treat it with the right respect. And it's useful for a lot of other stuff too. All the guys that like to talk about our Arduino community in here that does Arduino stuff. And even if you're not doing Arduino stuff, there's a lot of stuff that you may do that you may need to build some very simple circuits for. You can ferrite chloride and a piece of PCB. Help make that a lot better, more organized way to do that. And it's not that difficult to do. So if nobody has any more questions, we'll call this one, and we'll see you guys back next month. We'll get started on some hydrocal stuff, because I've got to get some city structures built for the city scene.
Well, if anybody wants to join us in the chat afterwards, they're welcome.
Alrighty. Well, appreciate it, Andy, Miles, Ralph, Lionel. Want to say next week Joe will be back Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. That'll be September the 19th, and of course on Thursday it'll be Johnny Small Train Talk, 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. Let's see. Yeah, this is Tuesday. I get a day off in between the two shows here, so we'll see you Thursday night for the Johnny Small Train Talk show, 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. I gotta quit looking at Miles. He's making me laugh.
Sorry, I said Lionel too.
Yeah. All right. Y'all have a good night. We'll see you Thursday night. All right.
Okay.